In just 4 minutes and 17 seconds, one question exposed the Prime Minister's biggest foreign policy failure. Kemi Badenoch didn't criticize America's Venezuela action. She asked something far more devastating. Where was Britain when the decision was made? Cameras captured Starmer's face draining of confidence. The Commons held its breath. What did the opposition leader reveal that proved the government talks about global leadership but gets excluded from the room when real decisions happen? At precisely 12:11 p.m. on Thursday, January 16, 2025, the House of Commons was packed for an emergency Venezuela statement. The Foreign Secretary had just finished explaining the UK's response to America's military intervention in Caracas, the operation that removed dictator Nicolás Maduro. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Prime Minister Keir Starmer was conspicuously absent from the government front bench. Kemi Badenoch rose from the opposition benches, burgundy suit, holding a single sheet of notes. That minimalism was deliberate. She had one devastating question. Madam Deputy Speaker, Badenoch began with measured authority. I would like to thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement on Venezuela. Nicolás Maduro was a tyrant who criminally abused the Venezuelan people and destabilized the region. There is jubilation on the streets of Caracas because Venezuelans remember what their country was like before socialist dictatorship. The opening was textbook. Agree with the government. Establish bipartisan credentials. Conservative MPs remained silent. Deliberate restraint before the storm. For years, the Conservative government refused to recognize Maduro's regime. Badenoch continued. We were pleased to see Labour follow suit. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are in a fundamentally different world. The however hung like a blade. Labour MPs shifted uncomfortably. The truth is that while China has been strategic and aggressive in strengthening its influence across the world, including South America, the West has been slow. Foreign policy should serve our national interest. We should be clear-eyed. She paused. 3 seconds of silence. The United States is our closest security partner. We must work with them seriously, not snipe from the sidelines. We on this side of the House understand why the US has taken this action. Politically brilliant, she was positioning Conservatives as the adults in the room, while Labour fumbled. UK policy has long been to press for peaceful transition from authoritarian rule. That never happened. The US has made clear it is acting in its national interest against drug smuggling and criminal activity, including potential terrorism. Her grip on the dispatch box tightened. The real attack was coming. However, we do have concerns about what precedent this sets, especially regarding Greenland. It is important that the United Kingdom supports its NATO ally Denmark, which has made categorically clear that Greenland is not for sale. Another agreement. But her posture betrayed what was next. What is critical now is stability of the region. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, when asked about US action, said that Venezuela had already been invaded by Iran, by Russia, by drug cartels, Hamas, and Hezbollah. The catalogue of hostile actors was devastating. Labour had been caught flat-footed. I am pleased to hear that the Foreign Secretary has spoken to Maria Machado, Badenoch continued. Then she delivered the question that would dominate every news cycle. But can she also update the House on whether the Prime Minister has spoken to President Trump? The chamber fell silent. Not will the PM speak, not when will the PM speak, but has the PM spoken, implying she already knew the answer was no. And I ask this, Badenoch pressed, voice rising, because the government talks up its relationship with the US, but we keep finding that we are not in the room when big decisions are made. The exposure was total. Not in the room. Britain's Labour government, which had spent months boasting about Washington relations, had been completely blindsided by America's most significant military intervention in the Western Hemisphere in decades. Conservative MPs erupted. Labour backbenchers looked stricken. Foreign Secretary David Lammy's face flushed red beside the Prime Minister's empty seat, abandonment captured by every camera. In a world changing as it is, Badenoch continued, gaining momentum. We must be serious about our security and standing. We know what the President's strategy is. The US is acting in its national interest. We need to do the same. Devastating. America has a strategy. America acts. Britain talks. Britain reacts. We should be working to protect the rules-based order. But what is our government doing instead? Giving away the Chagos Islands and paying £35 billion for the privilege with no strong legal basis. The pivot to Chagos was lethal. She'd connected Venezuela to a domestic controversy already damaging Labour. Last year, the Defence Committee warned that the UK was not adequately prepared to defend herself. The government is still stalling on defence spending. Conservatives want to see spending increase to 3% of GDP by the end of this Parliament. Why has the government not matched that commitment? The cascade of failures was overwhelming. Venezuela, Chagos, defence spending. Labour cannot protect British interests. It has never been more important for the UK to have a coherent foreign policy strategy, Badenoch said. Right now, Labour doesn't have one. If they do, we'd like to hear what it is, because I didn't hear anything in her statement. Surgical. You gave a statement. It said nothing. Let us be honest, Madam Deputy Speaker. Old strategies will not work. We are living in an increasingly dangerous world. The axis of authoritarian states respects just one thing: strength. Britain must be ready to defend our own interests, protect the Western alliance, and support democracy and freedom. At 12:19 p.m., exactly 8 minutes after the Foreign Secretary finished, Kemi Badenoch sat down. Conservative benches erupted. Labour MPs looked shell-shocked. The Prime Minister's empty seat had become the visual centrepiece, absence when leadership was demanded. The Foreign Secretary rose, face flushed with anger. But before he could speak, Sir Lindsay Hoyle called order, then recognised the Prime Minister entering from the side door. Starmer had clearly been watching from elsewhere and rushed in when he realised the damage. His face showed strain. "I must say to the Leader of the Opposition," Starmer began, voice tight, "that really felt like a very poorly judged tone of response that was all over the place. Defensive from the first word. Poorly judged tone suggested hurt feelings, not political counterattack. Many times when we were in opposition, we had issues we agreed with the government on. On Venezuela, she seemed to agree that the Maduro regime has been deeply damaging and destructive." He was listing agreements, hoping repetition would obscure that Badenoch's real attack had gone unanswered. The question hung in the air: has the Prime Minister spoken to President Trump? So in fact, I could not see a single detailed thing that she disagreed with, except that she seems to want to express opposition for opposition's sake. The phrase rang hollow. Everyone understood what Badenoch had exposed. But then Starmer made his fatal error. Rather than answering the Trump question, he pivoted to listing achievements. I think everyone recognizes the leadership that this Prime Minister has shown on the international stage. His voice rose with scattered Labour cheers, but the defensive tone undercut the boast. Chairing the coalition, leading European support for Ukraine, agreeing 3 trade deals. The biggest increase in defence investment since the Cold War. With the UK Prime Minister who talks frequently to the US. Order, order. The Speaker's intervention cut through the chaos. The Prime Minister will address the question that was asked. The chamber fell silent. The Speaker was forcing Starmer to answer. Has the Prime Minister spoken to President Trump about Venezuela? Starmer's face went pale, his jaw clenched. For 3 full seconds, he stood silent. I have regular conversations with the US President on matters of mutual interest, he finally said, voice hollow. Those conversations remain confidential in line with diplomatic protocol. The non-answer confirmed everything. He hadn't spoken to Trump. Britain had been left out. The special relationship was a fiction. Badenoch remained seated, face impassive, but the slight smile at her mouth said everything. She'd gotten her answer. The silence said more than words could. The chamber erupted. Conservative MPs demanded a proper answer. The Speaker's gavel banged repeatedly. Through it all, the Prime Minister's empty seat during the Foreign Secretary's statement remained the defining image. Within minutes, "Not in the room" was trending #1 on X. The hashtag generated over 600,000 mentions in 2 hours. Sky News ran split-screen footage comparing Starmer's boasts about US relations with his refusal to confirm Trump contact. By 2 p.m., Conservative campaign headquarters had cut a devastating attack ad. Starmer saying talks frequently to the US, followed by Badenoch's question, followed by Starmer's evasive non-answer, followed by Britain not in the room when it matters. By 40 p.m., polling showed 61% of Britons believe the government had been caught unprepared. Even 34% of Labour voters agreed that the UK should have been consulted before America acted. That evening, Downing Street issued a defensive briefing, claiming the Prime Minister is in regular contact with US counterparts at multiple levels. But the careful wording, counterparts at multiple levels, rather than President Trump, only reinforced that Britain had been downgraded. Foreign policy experts were unanimous. Regardless of whether consultation would have changed anything, the optics were catastrophic. A Labour government that had staked credibility on restoring Britain's global standing had been publicly exposed as irrelevant to America's most significant hemispheric decision in decades. For Kemi Badenoch, the Venezuela exchange became a defining moment. She had mastered the most difficult political maneuver, agreeing with the government on substance while devastating them on competence. She hadn't opposed America's action, she'd exposed Labour's absence from the conversation. The phrase, "not in the room," entered political lexicon as shorthand for exclusion from important decisions. Opposition MPs began using it to attack every aspect of Labour's foreign policy. On Ukraine, were we in the room? On Middle East peace, were we in the room? 2 weeks later, leaked diplomatic cables revealed Washington had notified London just 36 hours before the Venezuela operation, barely enough time for Starmer to request a phone call, let alone influence strategy. But the damage was done. The perception had solidified. Britain under Labour was a second-tier player that received notifications, not consultations. Sometimes political destruction isn't about opposing your opponent's position. Sometimes it's about exposing their irrelevance. On January 16, 2025, Kemi Badenoch proved that the most devastating question in politics isn't "what's your policy?" It's "why weren't you there when policy was made?" The strongest position in foreign policy isn't agreeing or disagreeing with allies. It's being in the room when decisions are made. And everyone watching understood one truth: Britain wasn't in the room.